If you were to stop a random person on the street and ask them for their thoughts on propaganda, chances are they would begin to describe propaganda posters in war films from the early to mid 1900s. To a layman, this could easily be perceived as a positive reflection of an informed society, who knows the historical background and inherent dangers of propaganda when used on the unsuspecting public. However, under critical analysis, this actually reveals a much darker truth. While most people know what propaganda is, the alarming majority of people either strictly view it as a thing of the past or something as to which they are apparently immune. So if the target audience for propaganda to be the most effective is an unsuspecting public, the propaganda machine could easily be running at maximum output and could be quite efficient at morphing the views of the general public still to this day. The only question is, does propaganda still exist? And if so, what effect is it having on our society? The goal of propaganda is to form a consensus to a standard set of beliefs by influencing and altering the attitudes of a population towards a specific cause, position, or political agenda. As someone who has taken a great interest in human psychology as well as studying marketing at university, I can't help but see a correlation between propaganda and today's advertising techniques. I mean, think about it. Both advertising and propaganda techniques try to persuade the target audience by hitting them on an emotional level. They don't deny this either. Dr. Robert Heath, a professor at the University of Bath and a pioneer in establishing the value of emotion in advertising, states, "My research with David Brandt and Angus Nairn shows that emotional response toward advertising plays an important part in building a strong brand. The basis on which meta-communication operates is entirely emotional, conditioning your feelings and building strong relationships. An ad that resonates emotionally is one that will build a stronger, better brand over time." You see, advertising agencies don't just know that their ads can subliminally affect people on an emotional level, they orchestrate their entire marketing campaigns around it. If manipulating people's emotions in order to sell them on something, and to structure how their brand is perceived in the minds of the general public, doesn't sound like Propaganda 101 to you, consider this. Joseph Goebbels was the Reich Minister of Propaganda in Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945. As part of Hitler's Ratsentag policy, coordinating the whole population in Nazi Germany behind Hitler, Goebbels drew inspiration for Nazi propaganda by studying the way advertising companies worked in America. Furthermore, Goebbels used his position within the Nazi hierarchy to influence newspapers, the cinema, theaters, art galleries, and radio broadcasts. What's more shocking is how proud the American Advertising Agency was about this at the time. The July 20th, 1933 issue of Printers, Inc., one of the lead advertising trade journals of its time, speaks approvingly of Hitler's methods and gives alarming insight into just how closely related propaganda is to advertising. The article stated, "As is well known, the word propaganda in Germany is used synonymously with the word advertising. Although in this country and in Great Britain propaganda has the unfortunate connotation of being free instead of being paid for, this distinction does not exist in Germany." Basically, this 1933 issue of Printers, Inc. is saying that the only difference between propaganda and advertising is funding. The reality is, propaganda and advertising are cut from the same cloth, and no one in their right mind would deny the existence of advertising in today's world. So why would anyone assume that propaganda no longer exists? Propaganda is a form of biased communication aimed at promoting or demoting certain views, perceptions, or agendas. And just as marketing campaigns on behalf of a given brand uses sinister means of emotional manipulation to sell their product, so too do propaganda campaigns subvert our consciousness in order to sell us on a foreign narrative in a means to manipulate the consensus. Really, the question of whether propaganda still exists today seems redundant in a world built on television slogans. So the high plausibility of propaganda's modern-day existence, based simply on the fundamentals of advertising and reasoning that one might have a political agenda to push, seems so firmly grounded on logic and reason that it really should be assumed a certainty. But both the threat and true effectiveness of propaganda is dependent on coordination. If a wide variety of people with diverse views on varying topics all own and contribute to different areas of media, regardless of how deliberate a potential propaganda campaign may be, the views expressed in that campaign will be canceled out by the opposition. Conversely, if there's a small group of people controlling the national narrative, it's more likely that the views held by those individuals will penetrate into the messages they present and ultimately make its way into the public's consciousness. And that's just assuming the people in control of media agree on a particular topic. That's not accounting for deliberate propaganda. If you take that same smaller group of people in control of the media and do account for deliberate propaganda, it's just a matter of time before the public opinion sways in favor of the national narrative being presented to them, because the opposition will be non-existent. Now here's the scary part. In 1983, 90% of American media was owned by 50 separate companies. By 2012, that same 90% of media was controlled by only 6 companies. And some modern-day figures have that number down as low as 5. But as damning as the consolidation of media corporations is, it lacks deliberate intention and coordination. That is, until you Google the Bilderberg Group. The Bilderberg Group is made up of 120 to 140 powerful individuals from around the world who meet every year to discuss policy. Oh, and by the way, these meetings are top secret and completely closed to the public. This chart from a few years back links the attendees' connections with corporations, charities, policy groups, and media giants. And don't even get me started on the annual meetings that take place at Bohemian Grove. Clearly, these individuals share similar views and are working to coordinate their efforts. So everything we've covered so far in this video would suggest that propaganda is not only as real as it was back in the early to mid 1900s, but that it's more relevant today than ever before. And so far, we've just been arguing off of deductive reasoning. We haven't even explored an example yet. Now, I could easily point to examples of propaganda in media related to warping the public's perception on politics.
What if the two-party system was actually a mechanism used to limit so-called public opinion? What if there were more than two sides to every issue, but the two parties wanted to box you into a corner, one of their corners?
Propaganda used to demean Christianity.
But then, Jesus, which religion should our family be?
601, they're all complete crap.
Thank you.
Propaganda to warp public perception on gun rights.
One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this. It's not enough to simply have a catchy ad on a Monday and then only do it every Monday. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way.
Or propaganda related to the glorification of drugs.
That was him testifying today in the House with other leading medical experts about this apparently newly controversial issues of vaccines that should never be controversial at all.
But the one that I'd like to use for this illustration is propaganda related to the LGBT community. A recent Gallup poll shows the support and opposition statistics for gay marriage between 1996 and 2015. According to this chart, the number of people in opposition of gay marriage has dropped from 68% to 37%, while the figures for those in favor of gay marriage has skyrocketed from 27% to a majority 60% in just 19 years. That is a major shift in societal norms. Be honest with yourself. Whether you're in favor or in opposition of gay marriage, do you really think that this drastic change in social perception was purely organic? The Gay Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, aka GLAAD, has evaluated the quantity and quality of LGBT characters during primetime television since 2006. Their stated objective is to push for positive representation and to increase the amount of representation. The 2015 GLAAD ratings and score, based on the percentage of LGBT-inclusive original programming hours during primetime television, shows that programming is at an all-time high on broadcast and cable networks. Folks, the LGBT community currently makes up only 3.4% of the population. So why is 8% representation considered a failing grade and 28% representation considered merely adequate? Check the link in the description for a fascinating article written by a former transgender individual who elaborates more on this coordinated effort to make LGBT narratives the new norm in America. A typical approach for indoctrination through the use of propaganda is as follows. First, the viewer is exposed to the information and is made conscious of the subject matter. From there, the subject matter, in this case the LGBT narrative, is assimilated to the individual on an emotional level, usually by way of a third-party participant. An example of this would be a beloved sitcom character's persona reflected in the subject matter. While the viewer experiences positive feelings towards that particular character, they are also subconsciously assimilating positive feelings towards the agenda being pushed. This links the orchestrated narrative with the viewer on an emotional level. The final step is repetition. The more the viewer is exposed to this, the stronger the emotional bond becomes, and thus the harder it is to break. This results in a permanent distortion of the individual's views, assuming they held opposing views beforehand. Further implemented techniques, as is the case with the LGBT agenda, also occasionally include a demonization of the opposition. The fact is, we are bombarded with propagandized messaging every single day, and the number one source for that indoctrination is our television sets. Watching TV puts the viewers into a highly susceptible sleep-like hypnotic state, largely caused by the screen flicker that lowers the viewer's brainwaves into what is called an alpha state. This alpha state of mind is what you'd normally associate with meditation or deep relaxation. And most people enter into this state of mind within 30 seconds to 3 minutes of television viewing. When in this hypnotic state, the information that you are exposed to is downloaded directly into your subconscious mind, where your existing beliefs are altered to form new beliefs without you even noticing. This is a very suggestive state of mind in which the right side of your brain tends to not critically analyze incoming information as it normally would. Again, check out the links in the description for more information. The average American watches 2 to 5 hours of television a day. Over the course of an average lifetime, that figure amounts to 9 years of a person's life. That's 9 years of indoctrination dedicated to programming every single man, woman, and child in this country. Now you may be sitting there thinking to yourself, but isn't propaganda illegal? Or wouldn't the government try and stop propaganda? Well, as it turns out, no. Back in 2012, an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, proposed by Mac Thornberry, a Republican from Texas, and Adam Smith, a Democrat from Washington, effectively nullified the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, which explicitly forbid information in psychological operations aimed at influencing U.S. public opinion. This amendment effectively allows the United States government to legally use, quote, information operations on the American public. These information operations, or IOs for short, are loosely outlined as incorporating, quote, the integrated employment of electrical warfare, computer network operations, psychological operations, military deception, and operations security in concert with specified supporting and related capabilities to influence, disrupt, corrupt, or usurp adversarial human and automated decision-making while protecting our own. And the primary purpose for IOs is to, quote, shape the essential narrative of a conflict or situation and thus affect the attitudes and behaviors of the targeted audience. So not only does the government permit propaganda to be used against the American public, they've actually taken special precautions to legally use propaganda on the general public themselves. People, propaganda is the most effective on an unsuspecting public. If you're the type of person to limit propaganda's existence to the pages of a history book, or think that you've somehow evaded any form of propaganda and its effects on your beliefs, then you are actually the perfect candidate for the propaganda machine. Now, I know it's difficult to consider that your beliefs may not be entirely your own, but it's important to try. The first step to overcoming any form of indoctrination is to be aware of your own susceptibility and to take an honest, introspective look into your own beliefs. Because propaganda is most effective when combined with emotional stimuli, it's important to analyze your own emotional responses to conflicting information that you may be presented with. In other words, if someone says something to you that you disagree with, and you feel an intense emotion in response to what they've said, chances are the beliefs that you hold on that particular topic are intimately tied to an artificial emotive response ingrained in your mind through years of indoctrination. Stay conscious to these threats of persuasion, and focus on evaluating new information from an emotionally neutral and purely logical frame of mind. Only then will you be able to counteract the effects of propaganda and start to form your own opinions.